up with as to why the aerial foragers might be declining?
Well, we knew from the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas and a couple of other atlases that birds that feed on flying insects are doing particularly badly. So they are called the aerial insectivores. The further east you go, the worse they are doing, and also the further north you go, the worse aerial insectivores are doing.
Pesticides are probably still a problem. Hard to get a good handle on exactly how much.
Some of the organochlorides that are used as a pesticide, they have been banned in North America for the past 2 decades or so, but they are still in use in Central and Latin America. So it's possible that by eating bugs that have been eating pesticides themselves, the effect on the birds is such that they just can't make it anymore. So these are population trends of 9 of the aerial insectivores, and they are plotted against time. So we are starting here in the mid-1970s going to today. And what you can see is that in the mid-80s, declines really started to go downhill.
A lot of these grassland birds winter in the southern U.S. And interestingly, the southern U.S. is going through some of the same things we are. A lot of the land there is converting back to forest. If you've driven down to Florida or down to Georgia, South Carolina, you know it's very much forested down in that area. A lot of those areas are fairly new forests, eating up the ground for those grassland wintering birds.
The habitat, reverts back to its natural state, then that should really be good for insect-eating birds. So, yeah, I think that can't really explain the trends we're seeing, unfortunately.
Urbanization of the land happening. There's this intensification of agriculture. We're going away from more pastoral landscapes into more intensively farmed landscapes is a big factor in all of this. I should say, perhaps because at this point the research hasn't been done to tie these results to these trends, but a lot of these things seem very likely to be factors.
It's like a lot of these big data sets, you really can't, you can say that this and this are both happening, but you can't really sort of get the linkage between them, the mechanism for that. It's really difficult. There's a really famous graph out there on the internet that the increase in air temperature is linked to the number of pirates. As pirates have declined, air temperature's actually gone up. So, it's just sort of, just because two things are correlated with each other, it's really hard to say whether or not one causes the other.
There have been studies in Europe that have shown that the birds are getting out of sync with the insect populations. The birds have evolved over the years to nest at a time when their young are being produced, when the insects that they feed on are most abundant. And so if something happens to that system, the insects start coming out earlier or later and not at the peak of abundance when the birds are trying to feed their young, of course that's drastic for the populations of the birds.
One thing that all these species have in common is that they're obviously all feeding on insects. So the most likely explanation is that something is happening to the prey base, something is happening to the insects. And it could either be that simply the insects are disappearing, or it could be that there is a mismatch of phenology.
The science of when things happen is called phenology. Potentially what we could end up with is a mismatch between the cues for going into diapause, or that's what the dormant sort of overwinter stage of insects is called. And so a mismatch between the light conditions and the temperature conditions. And this is actually where it's really important for birds. All the cues that the insects use in terms of going into diapause, when to come out of diapause, again are based on, it's a combination for coming out of diapause on the light cycle and the temperature. So if the insects come out and it's mismatched to when the birds end up coming back from their migrations, that can be a really big problem for birds, because at that point they're really food stressed. They need to produce their clutches, they need to feed those little hatchlings nestlings that really can't fend for themselves. And so if the insects aren't timed just right, that could potentially be a problem for birds.
Like with everything, it's probably a number of factors interacting.
There are a lot of birds in Ontario that seem to be doing very well, and that obviously very good news. There are quite a number that are doing poorly, and those obviously the ones we need to be focusing attention on.